Number 3, the board may discuss a letter complaint filed by Ken Block, the United States Department of Justice, concerning the Help America Vote Act and the voter registration process.
Mr. Chair, if I might suggest a process for this, that we hear from legal counsel, my legal counsel, and from the executive director. We can ask them questions and then have a public comment period with comments limited to 5 minutes.
Yes, sir.
I would move that as the process for this proceeding.
Second.
Second.
The second to move the process to a 5-minute rebuttal. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? We have it. Who wants to go first, Raymond?
Mr. Chair, I can just give a very brief summary. I believe what you have has been marked as number 3 of your packet. I don't know if the actual letter of complaint is attached. I believe that we've circulated that electronically to you.
Yes.
Electronically, yes.
And just very briefly, because this is not down for a vote, this is where we're in the initial process of assessing the complaint and coming up with what we hope to be a complete resolution to it. But there's an allegation from Mr. Block that's been filed with the Department of Justice. He alleges that the current registration process does not fully comply with all of the HAVA requirements, HAVA being the Help America Vote Act that was passed shortly after the Bush v. Gore presidential election, which imposes a number of requirements throughout the country to try to create some kind of uniform process for a number of things, not only in the way that registrations are processed, but also the way that they're tabulated. So trying to get away from some of the more antiquated systems that were in place with significant funding from the federal government to upgrade the tabulation process as well. The Congressional Act does require that the states collect certain information when you do register, when you begin the process of voting, when you begin the process of creating the voter application. And there are basically 3 different categories. The person who comes in person to the local board and prepares a form at that time, and who has either a driver's license, or if they don't have a driver's license, their last 4 digits of their social security number. A group of people who come before the local boards and say that they do not possess either a driver's license or a social security number. Those people are allowed to nonetheless continue with the process. And then a third set of people who do it by mail-in. So the complaint alleges that the information that is required from the first subset of registrants is not fully captured when those registrations are done. I've spoken to Mr. Rapoza a number of times. I've spoken to the staff with Bob several times, and we are assessing every option and what we should do in response. We understand, and at least the staff has done a review of some other states. It's not complete, we need a little more time, but it does appear that we are not alone in the way that we process first-time applicants. And I think that's important that we at least know that. It's also important to know that what HAVA intended to ensure, the intention of HAVA was to make sure that before you cast your ballot, you are properly identified as being who you say you are in the application process. And by the time our process is completed, that is done in our state. We have photo identification, so everybody who comes before the local boards, whether in person, in the mail-in process, there is a process that, when it's done full circle, satisfies, I believe, the intent of HAVA. Nonetheless, we have some language in HAVA that we're carefully looking at and assessing the possible need to modify our regulation, change our form, so that we can be assured of no ambiguity as to whether or not we do comply fully with HAVA. So our hope and it's actually our expectation we will have options and a recommended course of action no later than the next meeting, and probably if you wanted to have a special meeting, we would have it done by then as well. But we will have a recommended course of action for you to follow so that everything in HAVA, there's no ambiguity that we're complying.
Could we get a report from Mr. Rapoza, and perhaps we could ask questions of him?
Robert, would you give us a report on that?
I can, we will be preparing a report.
Can you give us some preview of what you're finding? Or are you not comfortable with that?
At this time, I would like to refrain from that if at all
Okay.
possible, because we are in the process of doing our investigations, and we have been doing so since last week when the complaint was originally filed.
And you weren't given any prior notice of this issue by Mr. Block before he filed with the Department of Justice, is that correct?
That is correct. We obtained a complaint from the Providence Journal.
You got the complaint from the Journal?
That's where we've had it. the decision.
Okay.
Not from the Department of Justice?
Not from the Department of Justice, not from Mr. Block? Okay. Well, that says something. Okay. So, the question I have is, you are looking at how other states go about this process.
That is correct.
Right.
We are looking on how do other states process first-time registrations post-HAVA.
And you're looking at, obviously, jurisdictions controlled by Republicans as well as jurisdictions controlled by the Democrats.
We are looking at
At
50
everybody.
states.
You're looking at everybody.
We're looking at.
You want to know, before you go off on this, you want to make sure you know what it is that's the consensus approach in the country about this, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Mr. Marcaccio, I have a question for you. It seems to me that one of the issues here, and you didn't address it, but it seems of some concern to me, is whether or not the interpretation that Mr. Block, who's not an attorney, but the interpretation that Mr. Block provided would raise possibly some equal protection issues, in that it creates two different classes of people in a suspect category. Voting is a highly protected right under the law. The Equal Protection Clause prohibits categories that are not related to a serious state objective. So if we were to, there is a question that I suppose we're investigating, is whether or not, in fact, if you differentiate between people who do not have the information as opposed to people who simply refuse to give it, if that isn't a suspect classification under the Equal Protection Clause. Is that something we're looking at?
We will look at that. I think you have to break it down into really two issues, and the first of which is whether or not the language of HAVA requires it. So we have to at least be mindful that if we're confronted with an ambiguity as to whether or not we comply with all of the language, that would be the first part of the analysis. And as a state agency that must comply with the Congressional Act, that would be likely the end of the analysis. Now, the second issue is whether or not somebody could challenge some of the requirements under HAVA. We are looking at that. That would be a separate observation that I would make to the board, but it's, and I can appreciate why you're saying it. But if HAVA has the requirement, then we as a state agency would have to abide by it. Now, it's interesting that you can have a person who comes in who appears before the local board and says that he has a driver's license, doesn't give it, and under one interpretation of HAVA, that person cannot proceed with anything else for
Can't do
voter
anything.
registration.
Right.
A person who's very similar to that comes in the same place, goes to the same desk, and is told that he doesn't possess it. He doesn't have that information. That person gets a green light and proceeds nonetheless through the entire process. That first person who appeared could be told, well, if you don't want to give it, just walk over here, I'm going to give you a mail-in registration form, and you mail this in, there's a mailbox right outside our office, and they also would get the process continued. I can't, explain why Congress broke it up that way. And ultimately, if it is a requirement, like I said initially, it may really be of no moment to you. You know, if the language is there and we have to abide by it, we will. So that's, for us, it's more of, what are the other states doing, but more importantly, what do we need to do to our regulation? And certainly by no later than the next meeting, we will have a planned course of action directly on that issue of what we would do for your
Right.
decision, for your consideration. And it would be also available for public comment. We certainly would be seeking, inviting public interest groups to comment on it before anything is done, and we would follow the Administrative Procedures Act process.
And again, we're not subject to the APA, but we follow it voluntarily with respect to regulations and other matters.
We have for at least, I've been doing this 15 years, at least 15 years, yes.
And so that prevents us from doing anything tonight.
It's not on the agenda and for a vote, and frankly, it couldn't be because we do need a little time to come up with the best course of action that not only ensures that we comply with HAVA, and I think we do, but to avoid any ambiguity, but also we're mindful of the impact on the voter registering. So we want to keep
And
that
one
in
of the
mind.
things you said was that because we have the voter ID law, if there is an issue, that issue is corrected by the time the person actually tries to vote. Is that correct?
It seems to me that, at least with respect to the intent of HAVA,
Right.
the purpose for HAVA, we comply with that because we are making sure that the person who appears at the polling place presents the adequate information to verify who he or she is. And I think that this particular part of HAVA is what was intended to be accomplished.
And one of the things you're going to do is look at any possible other states, see what they do. You're going to look at legal opinions, see if there's any case law, see if there's any justification one way or another other than a layperson's opinion. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Anyone else? Thank you, Ray.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I think we could open the floor to comments, 5 minutes limitation.
Okay. All right, the floor is open for public comments. Anybody?
Am I still sworn?
You are.
Okay.